Hi, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Live with Marcel and Kilani. We're really excited today because we have an amazing guest for you that we're going to bring on in just a minute. That's Dr. Caroline Burns. And Dr. Caroline Burns specializes in work of the future. So kind of like, what is the future workforce really going to look like? What are some of the challenges that we're going to deal with? So if you are in leadership and you're are going to be around for a while, in this space, this might be a really important conversation for you. So I'm going to pass it on to kids.
Great. Thanks so much for the handover. It's great to be back live. It's been a little while since we've done our last episode, so it's always fun welcoming back a new guest and a new exciting topic that we have to share today. So as we mentioned, we have Dr. Caroline Burns here with us, and she's an entrepreneur, a thought leader, and executive consultant specializing in the future of work styles, and workplace performance. She established and leads a team of experts at Workplace Revolution to help multinational clients amplify the value of work-related strategies, optimize the performance of their people, and position for ongoing changes. We've seen huge shifts in leadership, especially since COVID, and Caroline has a really interesting perspective on these changes and what we can look forward to in the future. So without further ado, Dr. Caroline Burns, would you like to tell us a little bit more about yourself?
Thanks, Kalani, and thanks, Marcel. Actually, and thank you for the introduction. I actually started off wanting to be a veterinarian, so if you can imagine anything more opposite to what I do. Like most people, our journeys are a little bit varied.
Yeah.
And then went and studied architecture after that. Originally discovered pretty quickly I was going to be a pretty average architect. So then got into sort of business and was hoping to get into property development because I love working with creative people. So I thought I could work with architects. But unfortunately, at sort of my age, what happened when I graduated was there was a huge property market crash, a huge stock market crash. So that was kind of a little bit of a foul idea. So I got into something that at the time was called facility master planning, which is a really early precursor about 30 years ago to kind of the area that I'm in now, which is really about trying to map and align the way people work, the places and the tools they use to work with the organisational culture and the organisational kind of vision and values. So it was a very early kind of precursor to that, and I worked across higher education, universities, defence, health and workplace as well, which is obviously where my career has more taken me. But I guess as that journey's progressed, what I discovered pretty early on is I'm a builder. I love creating something. I love building businesses, mobilising great people around it, around a vision and around a really solid, I guess, sort of way of working together. And also through that, I love being able to provide opportunities for people who are original thinkers, but don't always fit neatly inside those boxes that large organisations have. So, I guess I've been able, over the various businesses I've built, and being a bit of a serial entrepreneur, being able to work with some really wonderful people and hopefully give them really great opportunities, to work with us and to do other things beyond us. So, as Kalani mentioned, Workplace Revolution is, I guess, my third business, based here out of Singapore. I've lived here this is coming up on my 17th year. I can't believe it. It flies so quickly. But as she said, we lead a great team of experts. We produce a newsletter every couple of weeks called Work Explorer. I think title's probably pretty self-explanatory. And I personally do another newsletter called The Regenerative Edge as well, which is probably also fairly aligned with this topic on leadership and the future of work and how organisations need to continue to evolve. So I guess that's a little bit about my journey in terms of how I got to be here in Singapore and talking about leadership and the future of work.
That's awesome. I think it's really cool that you've kind of worked through a multitude of different areas, starting as a vet, going to architecture, and then just slowly finding your path through there. That sounds very similar to both me and Marcel's journey as well. So we're huge fans of people who have variety in their background. So last time we spoke, you mentioned that you've seen a big shift in leadership styles, especially since COVID, where leaders are taking on a bit more of an authoritative role rather than an encouraging one. Could you tell us a bit more about what you're seeing here?
Yeah, I think, Kalani, that, obviously COVID and work from home forced leaders to empower their employees with a great degree of trust. and everybody had to pivot really quickly. And as you know, when people are in kind of crisis mode as well, there's often a great coming together. People forget their differences, and it's really just about, we're in survival mode personally and professionally. I think though through that, employees kind of realised that the previous kind of corporate line around you can't work from home or you can't be mobile because of security or because of this or you can't access to things. I think people realised, well, there's a degree of rubbish around that actually, because all of a sudden it's been able to happen for not everyone, but for a lot of, knowledge workers, it's been able to happen, very quickly. So I think that encouraged employees to take a little bit more kind of power into their own hands, and particularly through those first, I guess, years of COVID and coming out of COVID, as we know, as businesses started to recover, it was all about talent. And so I think employees kind of knew that they had the power, I guess, to be able to work the way that they want and demand that as part of, their contract with the organisation. Businesses were very focused on wellness, in all respects, financial, mental, emotional, physical, very focused on, community and culture and really supporting people. And I think that was, there were some seeds there that were planted, I think, that were incredibly positive. I think now what we're starting to see is a bit of a dialing back as the kind of the power pendulum is kind of swinging the other way, as it always does. It never kind of stays nicely in the middle where it would be nice with, these major global layoffs we're seeing, particularly in tech, but also financial services. We've obviously got, increasing inflation, which is putting huge financial insecurity and kind of pressure on people all around the world in all different ways in developed and developing economies. So that kind of power pendulum, I think, has swung towards leaders. And I think a lot of them have grabbed it with both hands and said, right, now we sort of have control. People are keen to keep their jobs if they can. It's not so much, if you don't give me what I want, I'll walk and I'll go to the, competitor down the road. I think that's really encouraged leaders to say, you know what, I'd like people to be coming back into the office again, and I'm going to tell them to come, and this is obviously just an example, to come back into the office 3 days a week, 4 days a week, because that's what I want. That's what I think is good for the business. I don't necessarily need to explain myself particularly well about that. And if people don't like it, bad luck. Are they really going to leave in the current climate? I think not. And the fact that many of them are now starting to tie this into performance as well, I think is very, there's a lot of worry, I think, around that, tying something that can look on the surface like presenteeism, like an attendance record, when you go to school. We didn't have that at university, but all of a sudden it's being like at school. John didn't turn up for school today. Has he got a note from his mother? That I think is a little bit scary, but I do understand why the pendulum has swung back, and there are valid reasons for it. And I think in some ways it was probably too far one way. No, I think it's in danger of swinging too far the other way.
Oh, that's really interesting, right? Because I never looked at it from that perspective. I was, you hear like, from, formerly known as Twitter, right? Elon Musk, calling, that all employees have to come to the office. And you're right, like there never really has been an explanation. And there, I'm hearing that from a lot of banks, as well as those financial institutions, as you mentioned. And I was always wondering, like, what is, for me, it's always about the emotion, right? I think a lot of leaders would like to say that they're very rational thinkers and decision makers, but at the end of the day, every decision we make is an emotional one. And so I'm always wondering, what could be that driving emotion, right? That is forcing leaders to feel like they need to take that control back to the way things were, pre-pandemic. Because let's be honest, things weren't always great pre-pandemic. It wasn't a solid system, right? In the sense of creating an environment that empowers productivity and engagement, as you mentioned. It's like, that presenteeism was a real factor, back in those days. And so for me, I was always kind of wondering, do you have any insights, like, based on conversations that you've maybe had with leaders?
Yeah, it's a really interesting question, Marcel. And I think, as you mentioned, while I find the mandates, very disappointing, I think there's a lot of negative implications that we can sort of, go into as well, particularly around misalignment, I think, with the way that the future of work is developing and needs to go for organisations to be sustainable. While I do find those mandates disappointing, I don't underestimate how tough leadership is in the present era. Leaders have been through a lot, and there's still an enormous degree of uncertainty. And I think it's that difficulty and huge degree of discomfort with uncertainty. And I get that. Uncertainties, most of us sit comfortably with uncertainty. And the way our lives are these days, I read a really interesting blog a couple of months ago, and this lady was saying that we've lost our ability to be able to deal with uncertainty because we can control so much of our lives, and we have so many we have so many apps, we have so many recommendations as to what to do, where to go, how to think, how to dress, how to put your makeup on, everything, whatever you want to do, you can find someone else to tell you how to do it, or what is the right way, what is the best way, what is everybody else doing. So you can take as much risk and uncertainty out of many of your personal choices as possible. But leading a business, there is an enormous degree of uncertainty. So I think that fear almost of uncertainty, of being wrong, is a very real one for leaders. I think that we realise that we're not going back. From my perspective, I don't think we're going to land on a new normal anytime soon. So this level of uncertainty, which is obviously part of the environment we're in, it is a VUCA environment. It was before COVID. As you said, Marcel, a lot of these things have just accelerated, or they've become more apparent. I think people in our roles in consulting could see a lot of this before, but perhaps leaders, couldn't necessarily see to what extent we were living in a world where there's a huge degree of both complexity and ambiguity. So how do you lead? How do you navigate? How do you look like what bloody hell you're doing when there is so much risk that you might get it wrong? And I think that's why they're seeking to control things that they can control. And to a degree, there's a little bit of follow the leader there as well. Someone puts it out there like Elon Musk or something, and it gives the other leaders a safety net to kind of go, well, he's doing it, I can do it too. It takes that a little bit of that fear and that risk away.
It almost, as you're saying that, it almost makes me think of the toilet paper syndrome, right? It's like during the pandemic when for people for no reason at all decided that it'll be a really good idea to stock up on toilet paper. Of all things, right? And I guess in a way, this is kind of the same thing, right? It's business leaders, have to deal somehow with this emotional overstimulation, right? Of dealing with this ambiguity and this uncertainty, and so let's stock up on toilet paper. Right, it gives us comfort. It gives us comfort that at least we're controlling something, and so in a way that can it becomes the same kind of decision. That's actually really interesting. I never really thought of it that way. So
exactly, cool. And I think this is I think as you mentioned, and I had a couple of conversations with other kind of thought leaders in this area around. I think our expectations of leaders, I guess naturally are higher than of other people, but we talk about, in organisations, we need to have the ability to evolve, to be able to try things, experiment, fail fast, move on. And so in that context, why are we so afraid of our leaders being wrong? Why are they so afraid of potentially being wrong when, in theory, they could position it as the organisation is going to navigate, you may have to change course. I know where we're going, and our board and our executive, we know where we want to go and why we want to go in that direction, but we will need to change course. There will be things that we can't control or can't foresee, and that's not being wrong. It's just being smart and savvy and being able to move. But we don't seem to be able to allow our leaders to have those, to be able to articulate their decisions in that way, to be able to say that wrong is not wrong. We just need to be able to have that flexibility to constantly learn and try things and grow, and be able to quickly realise if something's not working, I'm not going to fall on my sword. We just need to change tack.
Absolutely.
We
Yeah.
don't seem to say that what is good for organisations is unfortunately good for our leaders, and I think that puts them in a very, very uncomfortable position.
Absolutely, and there's very low tolerance for errors and for failures in leaders, right? And so I think that only adds to that pressure that they're then really dealing with. And same thing with in politics. I mean, look at and again, using the pandemic as an example. I don't think there is a country leader, right, who got it 100% right, and every single country had its share of criticism, right, and how they dealt with the pandemic. But at the end of the day, they were just doing their best. They were just because this was unprecedented times. Nobody knew what was what is the formula for success. Nobody knew what that was, and so everybody had to experiment and try, and there was very little tolerance for, and maybe still is today, right? There, it's as sometimes even people are reflecting back on those days for the mistakes that their leaders made, and probably that's what a lot of business leaders are dealing with today, right? Is that because there is such low tolerance for them to be able to explore, try things out. That it's almost easier for them to go back to the way that they knew things were, which is those pre-pandemic type of scenarios.
I'm really
Yeah, exactly.
I'm really curious too, as leaders start to feel this pressure and this fear, and we see them start shifting their styles towards more of that authoritative style. How is that affecting the employees and organizations?
I think it is really important to have a look at how it's affecting people, Kalani. And there's been I was only reading yesterday an article with some more, was drawing back on a lot of Gallup research, but also some recent research that McKinsey Institute has done as well on the impacts of some of these things and the desires, I guess, or the things that are important for employees in terms of their well-being and their level of engagement with an organisation. And certainly some of these things are definitely coming up, not just in surveys done a couple of years ago, but in research that's happening now as well. And I think the most important thing around, again, coming back, for example, to using return to office mandates as an example, because obviously they're widely talked about, there's a lot out there. So it's a good example, I think probably most people, watching this can relate to that. If you're putting these mandates out there, while people may comply, and particularly if you're using a bit of a stick to threaten them, with performance, the issue is that what are you really getting for that? You're getting compliance, you're getting presenteeism, but are you getting performance from people? What you are probably doing is eroding trust and respect. And that is something that is it's a very fragile contract between employees and their, and the organisations they work with. And eroding that has huge degrees of risks, I think, for organisations. Perhaps not at the moment where the power pendulum is with organisations, but it certainly doesn't bode very well for, I guess, sustainability of, corporate knowledge and people and the culture sort of long term. Because it assumes in some ways that, and this is what, I guess we're sensing with the clients that we work with, is that whether leaders intend for it to be this way or not, it feels for people as though the employers don't trust them to be able to make a decision. So I'll give you a title and I'll pay you money and I want you to be a knowledge worker and to be smart and do your job and make decisions, but I don't believe you can make a good decision about whether you should come into the office or not. That's how it feels, intended or not. And that is obviously contributing to an undermining of that mutual kind of trust and respect. If you don't respect me, if you don't think I can be responsible enough, if you don't think I'm smart enough to make those good decisions, and it kind of feels like you're treating me like someone who's 15 years old playing truant at school, what does that do for that kind of social contract with people? As I said, it drives that tick the box show up, but it doesn't necessarily drive people to do what you want them to do in the office. And you made an interesting point earlier, Marcel. We picked up on this in one of our newsletters recently, talking about or trying to unpack collaboration, telling people you must come back to the office because it's good for collaboration and it's important that you collaborate, isn't really giving people guidance and kind of guardrails or showing them what good looks like. So perhaps then that lack of communication or clear communication or demonstration of what we think good looks like as, you know, an executive team. What do we believe are the important parts of your work that really add value to the organisation, that benefit from working together face to face? What are those value-adding activities that really amplify your success as an individual and amplify our organisation's performance? What are those? Those are the sorts of things where you should make a decision around, you know what, I'm going to be doing this. I should be in the office to be able to do this and participate in this, or I would like my team to be here and do that. And there doesn't seem to be that level of articulation of what really are the expectations that we have. And so therefore, if there's a misinterpretation of those, or a lack of understanding about, well, is this a real reason, or is this just because leaders don't know how to manage a distributed workforce and are therefore, as you said, Marcel, reverting back to previous ways of managing, which is about presenteeism? Are you sitting in your cubicle or at your desk? Therefore, you're working, let alone you might actually be on Facebook or doing shopping all day, you know, on Amazon. The fact that you're, you know, behind is sitting in that chair suggests that you're working, whereas what we really want is for people to be working and focused up here. And that doesn't necessarily require you to be in the office. Now, of course, there are some things that are very important. We all know that, you know, when you bump into someone or you suddenly run into someone that you haven't seen for a while and seeing the smile on their face, you know, you don't get that on a Teams meeting when someone has got their, you know, their camera off. There's lots of wonderful things about being together with people personally and professionally, but I feel that leaders have a responsibility for doing a better job at articulating that, because they really are already, I think, starting to undermine kind of trust and mutual respect, which I believe is very dangerous for organisational culture and for organisational performance long term. It really does undermine their ability to be agile and responsive to that, you know, VUCA environment that we live in, if they have a whole lot of people who are behaving in kind of adverse ways and start to become selfish and not take responsibility, and not stand up and be accountable because they feel it's probably not going to matter anyway because I'm being treated like a child. So there's a lot of probably, I think, unintended consequences. I'm not saying the leaders intended for this to be the case, but we're starting to see it in a lot of different ways, and research is starting to indicate that there is a lot of risk about that erosion of trust and respect. And obviously employee engagement is so important these days, that I think there are probably better ways for leaders to be able to handle this. And I believe they do have a responsibility to try and educate themselves or try and relearn how to be able to maybe handle some of these situations a little bit differently, which I know is not easy, but if you want to be a leader, you're taking the tough path, and sometimes we need to do things that are tough for us personally.
For sure.
Yeah.
I think a key part of leadership too is the understanding that the way that you act directly influences the people who are working with you. And I think there's kind of always this conversation of, you know, the chicken and the egg, which came first, right? Does my behavior affect the people that work with me, or does their behavior affect me? And I think obviously it's a factor of both, but when you're in a leadership position, that very quickly becomes your responsibility to be the leader, to change your attitude, change the way that you're acting, to influence the people who are working with you. And so to kind of build on that idea, what do you think would be the ideal style or form of leadership for leaders to adopt?
It's an interesting question, Kalani. I don't necessarily think there's an ideal style. I do think, though, that, or my personal belief, I guess, which also, I guess, stems out of my way of leading, is, you know, you lead by essentially supporting people. If you're employing people who are great people and they're smart thinkers, and you want them to perform for you, then your role is really all about supporting them and allowing them to be their best rather than micromanaging them. You know, we live in a very different world and our expectations are very different. And as I mentioned before, you know, the future of work demands much higher capabilities from people, you know, from the roles that are left and the new roles that are going to be created and the roles that are going to evolve, you know, as, you know, machine learning, NLP, all of those parts, I guess, which are contributing to AI, continue to develop. We need people to be critical thinkers, problem solvers. They need to be able to engage in, you know, constructive teamwork and negotiation. to be able to have greater degrees of self-management and responsibility and autonomy. So recognising and trying to support those capabilities does need, as I mentioned before, that kind of culture and trust and mutual respect to thrive. And it is revealed as being hypocritical when you're demanding people to be present. Rather than setting expectations for performance and letting your smart, capable people decide how best to achieve that with their teams. So that being able to, I guess, step back and while recognising that every organisation will have underperformers, they existed before COVID, they existed during COVID. You'll always have people who, back in Australia, we call skivers, or slackers. There will always be those people, and yes, you need to proactively manage them, but do not punish or attempt to control 90 or 95% of your workforce when perhaps 5% is, not really performing and seeking to potentially take advantage and just, show up, and, whether a lot of quiet quitters fall into that basket or, I'm not entirely sure. I'm not going to cast judgment in that regard, but, I believe that, if leaders can try and help or see if they need to seek help in unlearning some of the unhelpful mindsets that may have served them well in the past, but are not necessarily going to serve them that well, or their teams and their people and their organisations that well in future. It may take courage to do that, but I don't think that there is anything. It's not undermining a leader's power to say, I perhaps need some help and I perhaps need to unlearn some things and relearn new ways of doing things. And to recognise probably that their managers, people managers, and we see this all the time, people managers are really struggling with their organisations. They took the brunt of, the pivot during COVID. They took the brunt of having agonised people on the end of calls who were going through all sorts of personal issues, mental health issues, as well as trying to navigate technology and a whole lot of things that are suddenly being changed. And I believe that those managers are still massively under-supported. And I believe if leaders want to help themselves, helping their managers as well, so that there is a greater degree of consistency, investing in some coaching and some specific training around managing distributed teams, may really help their managers, and that would take some of the pressure off leaders to be everything to everyone as well. So, again, an organisation is not made up of, one or two individuals. It's a whole army of people and, individual mindsets, and trying to harness those together and get that swarm moving in a relatively consistent direction. Sort of trying to control that individual agency and move it in the area that is going to be good and sustainable for those individuals and for the organisation is really important. But it takes more than just the leader. And I think for them to recognise that they probably need to better support and coach and train their managers, as well as potentially seek some of that support themselves, would probably go a long way to slowly moving forward in a direction that may prove much more sustainable and provide the organisation with a lot more agility, that ability to recognise when you need to change, you need to respond, you need to potentially change direction. Organisations need to be able to do that. You can't set a 5 or 10 year strategy these days and just stay on that path like a pair of train tracks, and assume you'll get to your destination. The current environment demands a lot more of all of us.
Yeah. And adding to that too, I think something I'm seeing as well is that pre-pandemic, right? I think a lot of organizations, and particularly the leaders and senior managers in those organizations, were often selected into those roles as being great task managers, right? Kind of being task leaders. And it was all about productivity, and it's about getting the work done, and and following the strategy, as you mentioned, that very that left brain type kind of approach, where I think through the pandemic, where we learned the value of people and the value of their well-being, I think where we are today is that that for a leader to be truly valuable, I think they have to be both a people leader and a task leader at the same time. Right. And that's a paradox, right? Because some people have a natural talent for being task leaders over people leaders, and others have a natural talent for being people leaders over task leaders, and a very small percentage of them just have a natural talent of being able to do both. And I think that's a paradigm where a lot of leaders need to be playing, in that space today, much more so, than where they were maybe 5 years ago, right? And that's quite a pivot for quite a number of managers and leaders if they want to maintain that degree of agility, right? That's going to be needed for this new world that we're actually working in.
I couldn't agree more, and I do believe that COVID has presented us with a huge number of opportunities, and we still have a window within which we can grab hold of those. These events don't necessarily need to be all negative, and I think that continued uncertainty and ambiguity, as you mentioned, is going to continue for a while, but there are opportunities within that as well as risks, and essentially a leader's role is to navigate those.
Absolutely. You both have mentioned a great number of characteristics for leaders to adopt as we transition into the future of leadership. If you could give one small action step or tip to the leaders watching this video today, what would it be?
I think it would be trust the people that your organisation has trusted to employ, and perhaps invest in a little self-reflection around the impact of your behaviours and the behaviours and actions that you're modelling and demonstrating, and how they might be interpreted or misinterpreted despite your intentions by your people, because there is huge risk in that misinterpretation and an erosion of trust.
For sure. Thank you for sharing that. So I'm just checking the time here, and I see that we're coming to the end of our conversation. So I just wanted to check in before we go into the end. Are there any other points that either of you would like to share before we close up?
I'd like to add actually to Caroline's advice. Fantastic advice, Caroline, totally. And something that I find myself saying a lot to leaders lately is in order for a leader to be that type of trusting leader, there are a couple of things that they need to do. And the first one is the ability to set their people up, and then being able to setting them up for success, and then being able to get out of the way. And I think getting out of the way of your people takes a lot of courage. And I think a lot of leaders are afraid of getting out of the way. And so a lot of dysfunction in leadership is caused because leaders are afraid to get out of the way. And that's where that big trust element comes in. And I think one of the greatest ways of building trust in that sense is simply by and CCL uses a model. It's also a paradox, and I think it's a great one. It's the ability to be both supportive and challenging at the same time. And I take that a step further, and I would say that you want to support your people in a way that benefits the business, but you want to challenge your people in the way that benefits them. And I think when a leader challenges their people in a way that benefits them, and what I mean with that, benefits their growth, it makes them better human beings. It makes them better, just in life, more confident, all of those kind of things, and challenges them always to be better as human beings, while at the same time supporting them to be the best they can be, for the business. I think you then create a winning formula of trust. I think when people start to feel and see that, that's when that trust starts to happen. And that's when, a leader can potentially at some point start moving a little bit out of the way and give people the freedom to be the amazing people that they are, because, every single one of these people were hired into the company as amazing candidates. And giving them that space is a very important piece of the puzzle that we often see missing still today in most leadership practices.
Great. Thank you for sharing that. I think that's a great point as well. And with that, Caroline, where can people connect with you?
So they can connect with me on LinkedIn. There are a few Caroline Burnses. And there is no doctor in my title. So if you look for that, you won't find it. But if you look for Caroline Burns in Singapore with Workplace Revolution, you'll definitely find me on LinkedIn. Or you can connect with me on email at caroline.burns@workplacerevolution.org.
Perfect. I'm actually getting your LinkedIn link right now, and I'm going to put it in the comments so people have easy access. So to all our viewers, if you're interested in connecting with Caroline on LinkedIn, her profile is there, and you can email her as well, as she mentioned. So thank you so much, Caroline, for joining us for our conversation today and sharing your wisdom with us and our audience. It was really great getting to hear about your experience and your expertise.
Thank you, Kalani and Marcel. A half hour just completely flew by really quickly, which is always a sign of a great conversation. So thank you.
Absolutely. And thank you so much for coming on, Caroline. That was so insightful. I always love chatting with you, and I highly recommend that, if you're listening to this on my news feed and you don't know Caroline, connect with Caroline. She has a tremendous amount of knowledge and wisdom to share in this space, and is definitely a great conversation, and will add a lot of value for your organization as well. So definitely make a point of reaching out to her when you can.
Perfect.
Thank you.
Cool.
All right.
Awesome.
And to all our viewers, thank you as always for watching, and let us know if you watched live or watched the replay. And if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to either me or Marcel, and we'll see you in the next one.
All right. In that case, it is all from us over here. I'm going to say thank you so much for watching this episode again. And remember, you can watch these episodes live there as well as on YouTube. So you can go to YouTube to the Level 5 Partners page, and you can watch all of our episodes from the past as they're coming up, and learn a lot more from the amazing guests that we have. Well, that's all from us, and I wish you all the best. Have a wonderful day ahead, and see you hopefully soon in a new episode. See ya. Bye.
Bye.